Hello, everyone. Today I'm here to talk to you about why change is hard and what to do about it. I know a thing or two about change. It has been the core theme of my life, really. I grew up as a chubby girl at a time and place where heroin chic was the beauty standard, and for decades, I had one wish: to lose weight. I would go for up to 7 days straight without eating. I would purge after eating, and I would obsessively restrict myself. Now, later as I learned more about what healthy weight loss actually was supposed to look like, I would, eat healthy and move my body. But it was only a matter of time before I found myself back in the kitchen, fork in hand, finishing an entire chocolate cake. And no matter what I did, I always ended up back at square one. And each time I felt a little bit more defeated and a little less hopeful that things would ever be different. Now, people often think that change is about willpower, about discipline, about doing the right things. And then when we don't succeed, it feels like personal failure caused by weakness, laziness. But what I've discovered is that change is really less about doing something differently and more about becoming someone different, which then begs the question, what part of my identity is fighting this change? We like to talk about mindset, but here's where most conversations about mindset fall short. They focus almost exclusively on the logical mind. But the part of us resisting change is usually not the part that we identify with, but rather the subconscious mind, which is not rational. And you can't use solid arguments or strong strategies to negotiate with it. It wants to be seen, to be understood. And here's the thing, your subconscious does not care about your goals. It cares about continuity. And it will happily sabotage a better future if the cost of that future is uncertainty. So you may be dealing with an unsatisfying job, or a relationship that hurts, or habits that you know aren't serving you, but your subconscious will still prefer that over the unknown. As we say, people will prefer a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. And this is where the problem actually lives. The life you say you want is on the other side of an identity that you keep protecting. And of course you are. The identity you have today is not random. You built it to keep the peace, to belong, to feel seen, to feel safe. And then when you change, what you're actually doing is trying to let go of a part of you that you created for love and survival, and you have no guarantee that this new identity will grant you the same benefits. And so your whole system will fight you. And eventually, the logical mind steps in with all of these incredible excuses as to why you should, in fact, not change at all. And before you know it, another year has passed with the same justification still intact.
Yeah.
So if we want real change, we have to stop letting those excuses make our decisions. And instead, we must be willing to act in ways that contradict who we've been before it feels right and before it feels safe. Each time we're faced with a decision, we have the opportunity to ask ourselves, who do I truly want to be? And then to act in alignment with our answer to that question. But before we can truly understand who we want to be, we have to understand who we were taught to be. For example, our resistance to change often shows up in our relationships. Few people have been raised in emotionally healthy homes, and that tends to reflect in our adult relationships. And this is why some of us tend to choose partners that trigger our deepest childhood wounds. We think we're falling in love, but it's more like falling into the patterns that we learned about love, especially the painful ones. So if you felt abandoned as a child, you may very well find partners whose main communication tactic is to leave the house when things get uncomfortable. It's almost as if our subconscious is saying, look, an unhealed wound, to which we will then conveniently turn a blind eye so that we can keep repeating the same patterns. Many of us say that we want a reliable, stable, loving partner. But if your childhood has taught you to expect unpredictability, you may subconsciously sabotage the relationship you have with this said stable partner. Now, in this scenario, familiar dysfunction feels safe. Unfamiliar predictability feels suspicious at best. And transforming that is going to require something much deeper than a mindset shift. Now, our internal wiring doesn't only impact our romantic relationships, it shows up everywhere we relate. We are raised in a world of constant comparison, always measuring ourselves against somebody else's success. And people will fight with their teeth to be the very best of them all. And then wonder why they have a hard time making real friends, or forming meaningful connections, or why they find it lonely at the top. But true connection requires vulnerability. And how can you reveal the cracks underneath the surface if everything has been designed to look perfect? Now, many of the high achievers I work with, they're dealing with an unreasonably harsh inner critic, making them believe that if they're not suffering, they're not worthy. Of success, yes, but also of joy, of love. And because we're taught that worthiness comes from hard work, people will work harder and harder until they burn out. Why do we do that? When we're taught that something works, but lived experience shows us that it doesn't, we will still double down and try even harder instead of doing something completely different. Maybe because it is too vulnerable to admit to ourselves that the thing we offered our pain to was never going to work out in our favor. Now, for people dealing with issues of worth, they're also less likely to take up space or to make big, bold moves or to do what they want without needing to justify it. It is not uncommon for people, especially women, to avoid holding firm boundaries or to do anything that will cause a scene. In her book, Rage Becomes Her, Soraya Chemaly explains how anger is robbed from women. For the women in the room, how often have you found yourself suppressing your own anger to make someone else more comfortable? Anger is powerful. It makes us push back against injustice. But anger is also considered ugly and definitely not feminine. Instead, women are offered passive emotions like worry or sadness, emotions that do not compel action. Instead, we will wait for someone else to come save us. Without anger, we are left with helplessness. Without righteous action, we are left with excuses and patterns that keep us stuck and frustrated that there seems to be nothing we can do about it. But how do we fight who we spent decades becoming? How do we change knowing that we might get ostracized or humiliated when society pushes back against our change? That takes bravery. Now, as we've established, our internal programming will reveal itself in many areas of life. And one of the most emotionally charged arenas is money. What we earn, what we ask for, what we believe we deserve. Many of us have been conditioned to give, to serve, to sacrifice, but not to receive. Giving is praised. Receiving is a bit embarrassing, greedy, maybe shameful. But if we don't pay attention, beliefs about money can become a shield. You see, if money is evil, then failure to earn isn't failure. It's virtue. But when you're intentional, you don't need the shield because you get to decide who you become with or without the money. In fact, money simply amplifies who you truly are at your core. Don't demonize the money just because it's safer than risking the pain of wanting it and failing. The paradox is, if you can't receive, what do you have to give? It is much easier to give when you have. when you are well-rested, well-resourced, and well-supported. Think about it. If receiving feels greedy, if success feels dangerous, the mind will create all of these incredible excuses as to why you should just stay the same. But you can't transform into someone who has something if part of you believes that having it is wrong. So whether it is money, health, or love, the same principle applies. Identity determines what you do. So how do we actually change? Awareness is not enough. That is the first step. The real work is in repeated action. We live in a culture that is obsessed with quantum leaps and overnight transformations, but people will want the result of deep change without doing the work of deep change. And when they get fast results without changing at the core, it doesn't last. 30 years of programming doesn't dissolve in a weekend. But each repeated action chips away at that old programming, and as you align your identity with who you truly want to be, change stops feeling like struggle and it starts becoming the way that you live. Now, this work is hard because it requires honesty. And honesty comes with a cost. It means admitting that some of the stories you've been telling yourself are not true, that your limitations are not facts, that your excuses have been protecting you, and that your identity has been running on outdated rules. And that is a huge blow to the ego, which is why most people won't do it. Not because they can't, but because they don't want to sit in the discomfort of seeing themselves clearly. Yet this is the most rewarding work there is. When identity shifts, our decisions stop being reflections, reactions of old fears, and instead become reflections of who we choose to be. Alignment is not something you wait for. It's not something you pray for. It's something you practice. And how you lead, relate, decide, it has influence. It moves what people think is normal. It challenges what people think is possible. And this is why change matters, not just personally, but collectively. Every system you participate in is shaped by the identities of the people inside it. And in the future, that will be no different. But much of our programming is based on echoes from past generations, even though the world around us has changed. So if we want to reimagine the future, we first have to understand how that programming limits us, limits our imagination, and limits our actions. And until enough of us are willing to step into identities that we have not yet met, our future will not be created from our imagination. It will be inherited from our past. Thank you.